إن شاء الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, today we're going to be speaking about the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an. And as we mentioned last time, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an, before he passed away, he specifically appointed Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an to be the leader of the Muslims. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an initially refused. And then Abu Bakr radiallahu an forced him, basically, as we mentioned, that he said, you are going to be the leader. And he even threatened him because of how deserving Umar radiallahu an was to be the leader. His humility prevented him from taking up the responsibility. He knew the responsibility of being the leader of the Muslims also. Yet Abu Bakr radiallahu an made sure that the leadership was settled before he passed away, and Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an became the leader of the Muslims. And there are a few differences between the leadership of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. From the main differences is the length of time. Abu Bakr radiallahu an was the leader of the Muslims for a couple of years, only 2 years, and Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an was the leader for approximately 10 years. So a long period of time. And this is why we have many, many incidents, narrations, stories, events recorded from the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an. And this is actually mentioned in a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a dream that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an was pulling water from a well, and he was struggling to pull the water from the well. When Umar radiallahu an, after him pulled water from the well, he was pulling water very easily. And the Prophet ﷺ said this is a sign of the Khilafah, a sign of the length of time that Umar radiallahu an would be the leader. He will be the leader for longer than Abu Bakr radiallahu an was the leader for. And also in terms of the decisions that they would make. Some of the decisions that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an made, and this shows us the differences of opinion that the companions had amongst themselves. So, nowadays, we see, for example, there might be differences of opinion amongst the scholars with regards to specific issues, whether it's salah, whether it's, Eid, whether it's clothing, whatever the issue may be. And some of those issues may not have any specific evidences, but in many cases, there will be a genuine difference in terms of how they interpret and understand the Sharia. And this is all going back to the Quran and the Sunnah, of course. The companions radiallahu anhum ajma'in would also differ with one another. It wasn't a differing where they ended up dividing amongst themselves, not speaking to one another, attacking one another, disassociating with other people, not cooperating with one another. They may have had differences, many differences, and there are many examples of this, as we'll see, but they were always together, and they would never go against the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. It was something which they had amongst themselves, but they had a level of maturity, brotherhood, and love for one another, that they wouldn't divide the ummah. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an, when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was the leader of the Muslims, one of the decisions he made was that every companion would be given a stipend, a wage. And if you were, for example, from the people who participated at the Battle of Badr, or you were from the Muhajirun, compared to those people who accepted Islam later from the companions, meaning the Ansar in Medina, for example, or those who became Muslim towards the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, they were still companions, but they weren't of the same grade or the same status as those who were at Badr, or those who were at those who were the first Muhajirun, for example. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, when he would give the stipend, would he give the same, or would he give a different amount? Would he give the same, or would he give a different amount? What do you guys think? He actually gave the same. He gave the same regardless of if a person was from the early Muslims, from the first Muslims, or if a person was from the last companions, to be a revert or to have reverted to Islam in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh disagreed. And this is just an example of how they would disagree with one another. But Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was he was the closest friend to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He was his deputy. He was his advisor, his senior most advisor. And he disagreed. He said, how can you give the Badriyun, those who were at Badr, the same as those who became Muslim later on in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ? There's a different level. And we know, of course, that there is a different level when it comes to the companions anyway. They have different ranks. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he said, how can I give different when I don't know what's in their hearts? Meaning, I don't know what's in the hearts of the believers. I don't know, and I can't tell how sincere one is over another. Maybe the case that one person is more sincere than another, and I'm giving one person more and I'm giving another person less. So this is something which is in the hands of Allah. Allah will reward a person based on their sincerity. As for me, a human being, I can't give one person more and give one person less, because I could be wrong in terms of my understanding of who that person is. His ikhlas and his sincerity could be more than another person. That person could be less than this person, for example. And it really shows us the mindset of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Sincerity was something very, very important to him. And we mentioned when we spoke about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, how he was a very, very sincere person. He had true ikhlas, because he was nobody significant or specifically talented when it came to battles, like Khalid ibn Walid, for example. And he wasn't somebody like Uthman, who was a millionaire. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wasn't, he was a trader, and he would give his money to charity. But his ikhlas is what made him who he was. He's recognized his status. He is who he is because of the ikhlas Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu had. And it just shows us the importance of having sincerity, the importance of ikhlas. Something which maybe we don't think, we don't give it as much attention as we should. And so it really shows us his mindset. He's looking at the people's intentions. And he says, I don't know people's intentions, and I don't feel like I'm comfortable giving people different amounts and judging them. That's something for Allah Azza wa Jal to judge them and to reward them for. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a human being. I'm going to give everyone the same, because they're all the same in my eyes. So this was the perspective of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he became the leader, what did he do? He changed the system. So he gave the Badriyun, the first Muhajirun, the senior companions, he gave them a higher stipend than others because of their ranking as companions. And so again, this was a difference that the companions had, but we see it wasn't something which caused them to divide. Umar radiallahu anhu still was loyal to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, still supported him, but they had these differences. And there's an interesting story of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu giving the stipend, and he gave Usama ibn Zayd a stipend, and his son Abdullah ibn Umar, he also gave him a stipend, and they were of a similar age, and they're both sons of companions. Of course, Umar radiallahu anhu is the second Khalifa of the Muslims. Usama ibn Zayd is the son of Zayd ibn Haritha, who was the adopted son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Umar radiallahu anhu gives them a stipend, and they're of a similar age, as we said, and he gives more to Usama than he does to Abdullah, even though they're of a similar age. And even in terms of ranking, of course, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu was a scholar from his time. Usama ibn Zayd was known for his warfare. But he gives more to Usama than Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. And Ibn Umar comes to his father and says, what's happening? How come he's getting more than me in terms of our status? We're similar in terms of our status, our age, etc. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when his son comes to him and mentions this and asks him this question, Umar radiallahu anhu, he says, the reason why I gave him more than you is because he was more beloved to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam than you, and his father was more beloved to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam than your father. Speaking about himself. So he says he was more beloved to the Prophet than you, and his father Zayd was more beloved to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam than your father, meaning myself. And it really shows us the humility of Umar radiallahu anhu. And it also shows us his justice, his clear idea of justice. And he was very just down to the exact stipend and wage that he was giving each and every single companion based on their level and of course based on his understanding. And it shows his humility also. He understands that there were others who were more beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. Of course, Zayd ibn Haritha was the adopted son of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And also, we know that Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that if Zayd radiallahu anha had still been alive after the death of the Prophet sallallahu لَاسْتَخْلَفَهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. He would have been the leader after the Prophet sallallahu because of his status, the love that the Prophet ﷺ had for him. It was his adopted son. And this was one example of the differing that they had. And there are other examples of the differing, but it really shows us that, we have this idea that there shouldn't be, sometimes people think there shouldn't be any differing and everyone should be on the same page, or in terms of the way a person prays, for example, or fiqh issues, everyone should be on the same page. But as we know, there are clear differences that occurred in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, but also in the lifetime of the Khulafah Rashidun, that they had these disagreements. And it's not something which is uncommon. So long as they are giving clear evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah, and they are using evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah to prove their points, then of course this is something which is understood to be the case nowadays. It doesn't mean that a person has to disassociate or think that one person or one group, are maybe doing something which is haram, for example. And even Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, he would disagree with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, but they will still work with one another, they will still cooperate with one another. And of course, the companions are a hujjah, meaning they're an evidence. So a person can use the actions of the companions as an evidence in and of itself, because they are the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is one example of the difference of opinion and the different ways in which they would govern their affairs. Another example is, of course, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh was somebody who was the leader of the army in the lifetime of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh essentially demoted Khalid ibn Walid when he became the leader. And even in the lifetime of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anh, Umar radiallahu anh would have some criticisms about Khalid. Some of the decisions he made, some of the things that he did. There were certain examples, certain incidents, we can't go into the details, but certain people, as a result of miscommunication, we may have mentioned in the example of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's life, when we were speaking about his Khilafah, certain people were killed when instructions were given not for him to be killed, or there were not clear instructions given, there was a miscommunication. Other examples of Khalid ibn Walid making certain decisions there and then that he had to make, and he couldn't wait because of him having to conquer certain places and certain lands. And so certain decisions were made which Abu Bakr radiallahu anh reprimanded him for. We may also mention the example of Khalid radiallahu anh, quickly going to Mecca to perform Umrah or to perform Hajj, while the army was traveling to another land, and then he left while nobody was watching, and then obviously somebody found out and told Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So these kinds of incidents, Umar radiallahu anh, he didn't agree with the things that Khalid ibn Walid was doing. And again, as we said, these differences and these disagreements doesn't mean that they had a dislike or a hate for one another. And there are even examples of Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh later on in his life, after he had been demoted by Umar radiallahu anh, mentioning that initially I was disappointed, but now I realize why Umar radiallahu anh did what he did. Meaning he understood why Umar had made those decisions. So Umar radiallahu anh demoted Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anh, and he made Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah the leader of the Muslim army. And it's very interesting, Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh, when he was given the instructions, he brought everyone together and he told them that I have been chosen to be the leader. However, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to make any decisions until and unless Khalid ibn Walid basically agrees. Which essentially means that basically who's in charge? I mean, Khalid is still basically in charge. He's saying, I'm not going to make any decisions unless he agrees, unless he's accepting of the decisions that I make. So even though officially he was demoted, Abu Ubaidah radiallahu anh still realized this is Khalid's Khalid. Like, I'm not going to like just completely, put him to one side and ignore any of his opinions. He is who he is. And so essentially, there weren't any issues even amongst the companions who were in the army. The army itself was united. And also, it said that one of the reasons why Umar radiallahu anh demoted him is because he wanted people to realize that victory doesn't come from one specific individual. As we know, Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anh was undefeated. He had never lost any battle in his life. And it's like the analogy of a football team, for example. You have an amazing player, and that player is like the star player, okay, and they win because of him. And then he gets injured. What are people going to think? We're not going to win anymore. He was a star player. He's injured now. It's over. That's it. It's the end of the world. Okay, the team's not going to win anymore because the main player, the star player, is gone. But in Islam, Umar radiallahu anh knew and understood that victory comes from Allah. Victory comes from Allah, not from any specific person. And that he wanted people to realize that Allah is the one who gives victory, and that we shouldn't rely on one specific individual, because Allah forbid something happened to Khalid radiallahu anh, people would be demoralized. They would think that this is the end, or they would think they've lost the sole reason why they're being victorious and why they're attaining victory after victory. And so Umar radiallahu anh wanted to show people that victory doesn't come from one specific individual. Also, it would raise the standards of everybody else. It would raise the standards of everybody else. Everybody else, sometimes when there's a star player, people just take a step back. That okay, he'll do all the work. He'll work hard for us. Khalid radiallahu anh is there. He'll make the effort. He'll make the decisions. So people take a step back. When someone's in charge and he's doing a very good job, people just tend to follow. They don't need to make the decisions for themselves. But when there's a step back taken by that person, others have to step up now, and they have to make decisions, and they have to lead. They have to gain the experience and make more effort. So it's also a reason why others would step up and they would contribute more. Not that they weren't contributing, but just psychologically, they realized that they also need to make the effort. And of course, Khalid radiallahu anh was still there, as we mentioned. So it really shows us Umar radiallahu anh's perspective. He was somebody who was loyal to Abu Bakr Siddiq. He loved Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh as did the other companions, and he loved, of course, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But these differing and these different approaches that he had was from the nature of Umar ibn Khattab. And it also shows us that leaders are never going to be the same. So of course, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was nothing like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mean, in terms of his nature, in terms of who he was, the Prophet is the Prophet of Allah. Abu Bakr isn't a prophet. And his approach and the way he was and the way he dealt with things was very different to the way Umar radiallahu anh dealt with things. And, leaders are not going to be the same. So a person may step up and be the leader or a manager of a company, or the prime minister, for example, of the country, or a king. Okay, something happens to him, somebody else steps up. They're not going to be the same person. You're never going to have the exact same leader. Every leader will have their strengths and weaknesses. And so a person needs to understand this, and we see this with the Khilfah Rashidun, with Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhum ajma'in. So Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh would make these decisions, but it also shows us his confidence. The fact that he's willing to make his own decisions, to pave his own path. He's not just going to do everything which Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh did and just keep the same system and the same protocol which Abu Bakr radiallahu anh had. He was changing things based on what he thought was best. So it shows his humility, recognizing the differences. It shows also his confidence and his ability to make decisions for himself. Umar radiallahu anh also was somebody who, as we said, was a very humble leader. He showed humility, and there are many examples of the humility Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh had. There's an example of one of the companions. He said, I saw Umar ibn Khattab every night going into multiple houses during the night. And he did this repeatedly. And so I went into one of the houses after a few nights, and there was an old lady, a blind lady. And I asked her, who is this man? She says, yes, this man, he comes to us and he cleans and he cooks and he, takes care of my house because I can't take care of it myself. And he does this every single day. And the companion, he said he left and he realized that this is Umar radiallahu anh, the leader of the Muslims, personally going into people's houses and cleaning their houses for them. And he's the leader of the Muslims. And he said, how are we going to follow your, how are we going to follow your path after you pass away? Talking to himself. He's looking at Umar radiallahu an, he's realizing the sacrifices Umar radiallahu an was making, the effort he was making. And even Umar radiallahu an, he would say that if a donkey stumbled on a road from the roads of the Muslim lands, I would feel like I will be responsible for its stumbling on the Day of Judgment, because the road wasn't paved properly. So this was the effort. I mean, if you think about the way he's thinking, the effort that he would make to serve the Ummah really is reflected in these kinds of statements. The motivation he had to try to do whatever he can. And of course, there are other examples. There's an example of a woman who had children, and the children were crying because they had no food. And he saw them, and the woman would have a pan of water, and she was cooking, or she was looking like as if she was cooking something, and he would ask, why are the children crying? She said, we don't have any food. I'm just stirring the pot, hoping that they'll just fall asleep while they're crying, but there's no food, I don't have any food. And so he went to collect food with his slave. And he took some food and he put it on his back, a sack of food, to take it to the lady. And the servant said, let me carry it, O Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Umar radiallahu anhu said, woe to you, are you going to carry my sins on the Day of Judgment? Meaning, this is my responsibility, I'm going to do this. So he took the food himself and he gave it to the lady. In fact, they say he also cooked it for them, so that she could feed them. And once they had been fed, and once they had gone to sleep and they were happy, that's when he realized he had done his job. So it really shows us the motivation of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an to give justice and to show justice to others. Also, the famous example of Umar ibn Khattab's conquests. Of course, many lands were conquered in the lifetime of Umar ibn Khattab, and one of those places was Jerusalem. Jerusalem was conquered in the lifetime of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an, and Abu Ubaidah radiallahu an had conquered Jerusalem and that area for the Muslims. And they said, when it was conquered, the Christians, they said, we will not give the keys to the land of Jerusalem except to the leader of the Muslims. And some even say that this was in the scripture of the Christians. From the scripture, it said that those who will conquer the land, the key will be given to the leader of those people. And so a message is sent to Umar radiallahu an, saying, look, they won't give the key except to the leader, so we need you to come. So Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an, he makes his way with one slave, and they have one animal, one horse or a donkey, and they're traveling on one animal, and they have to take turns because there's only one animal. And they're going to Jerusalem. Like, this is almost like one of the crown jewels of the Roman Empire. So look at it. It's one of the crown jewels of the Roman Empire. So Umar ibn Khattab is making his way. Of course, he could have had two horses. In fact, he's the leader. Imagine a leader came today to the city, for example, and they came in just one car, and there's like 3 or 4 of them in the car, and it's a regular car, like it's a Honda or something, or a Toyota, or a Mini Cooper or something. We would laugh. But it's very interesting. If a person came, the Prime Minister or something, or the Mayor, and he just comes in his jeans and his T-shirt, tracksuit bottoms, it's something we wouldn't expect. But it does show us, if that was the case, it shows us maybe the humility of a person like this. That the person isn't really interested in, his public image and how he's perceived by other people. Doesn't really concern him. So Umar radiallahu an, he makes his way on a mount, and they're sharing, and he's dressed, it said, in a thobe which had patches. So when his thobe would be ripped or be damaged, he would basically stitch it himself, and he would put patches on his clothes to repair. And this was his thobe. They also say he would only have 2 thobes, one for the summer and one for the winter. So this is how he was. He didn't have lots and lots of clothes. Like we have clothes in our wardrobes, we don't even wear them. But this was the way Umar radiallahu anh was. And so he arrives just outside of Jerusalem. Abu Ubaidah sees him, and he rushes to him before he can enter the city. And he says, basically, he says, "Oh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, you're entering Jerusalem, and maybe you should have made a bit more effort, like, in the way you've dressed, because you're entering the city. It's a great city. There's like royalty there, the royalty of Jerusalem. The elders and the seniors and the wealthy and the people who are of status in the city. They're waiting for you to arrive, and of course they're already dressed. And normally there's an entourage, even not just with like politicians, but with celebrities. It's just the way people are. And so Umar radiallahu anhu, when he heard this, he said, if only somebody else had said this, O Abu Ubaidah. He said, نحن قوم أعزنا الله بالإسلام. We are a nation, Allah has given us honor through Islam. Meaning it's because of Islam that Allah has given us honor, not because of how we dress and because of how we look and the horse, etc. It's because of the deen of Allah, because of us being Muslim, that we're here in the first place. This is what's given us honor. And so he entered the city and he conquered Jerusalem, and it said that he was even offered to, they were so impressed with Umar radiallahu anhu, with his demeanor, it had the opposite effect. They had more respect and more love for him. Because never in their lives had they ever seen anybody conquer a land and he's dressed in this manner, he comes from another land in this way, giving this kind of impression. So instead of it being a negative, it was actually a positive. They realized this person doesn't care about his appearance necessarily. Doesn't care about what other people think. And even the way he behaved, they realized this person seems like a just person, a humble person, a righteous person. And so when they went into the church, they said to Umar radiallahu anh, we're going to allow you to pray here, like as a sign of respect. And again, that shows us the impression that Umar radiallahu anh had on these people. He's in their place of worship, yet they're saying, you're more than welcome to pray here, in this church. Umar radiallahu anh said, no, I'm not going to pray here. They said, why? He said, because wherever I pray, at some point in the future, they're going to build a masjid wherever I pray. Because he understood how the Muslims are. And true enough, when he did leave and he prayed outside, away from the church, they did actually end up building a masjid there. And it's called Masjid Umar. And Allah knows best if it's still there, but there's a masjid still. Recently it was still there. Allah knows best what's happened. May Allah ease their suffering, what's happening to the brothers and sisters in Palestine. But there is a masjid called Masjid Umar. If you go online, you can find images, Masjid Umar, Jerusalem. And the masjid is basically built where Umar radiallahu anh actually prayed. Again, it shows us the humility of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh. It shows us, the way he was. He was somebody who had the objective of pleasing Allah first and foremost. And we also know of his justice. Many examples of his justice as he was the leader of the Muslims. There is an example of a slave's son who was horse racing, with the son of Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. Amr ibn al-As was the leader of Egypt at the time, the governor of Egypt, appointed by Umar radiallahu anhu. And his son was racing this slave with horses, and the slave won the race. And out of anger and frustration, maybe embarrassment that he's lost to a slave, he started whipping the slave. The slave complained to his father, and both of them traveled from Egypt to Medina to complain to Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar radiallahu anhu kept them there, and he called Amr ibn al-As and his son. He said, bring your son with you. So he brought the son, and he inquired as to what happened, and he realized that whatever happened, and it's true, the incidents that occurred. So he gave the whip to the slave's son, and he said, now whip Amr ibn al-As' son just like he whipped you. And so he whipped his son, Amr ibn al-As' son. And when he was done, he gave the whip back to Umar radiallahu anh. Umar radiallahu anh gave him the whip back and said, now whip his father. Whip Amr ibn al-As. And the slave's son, he said, I've got no beef with Amr ibn al-As. I don't need to whip him. My issue was with his son. I don't want to do anything to Amr ibn al-As. Umar radiallahu anh said, if you had whipped Amr ibn al-As, I would have let you. Why? Amr ibn al-As is a companion of the Prophet ﷺ. Umar radiallahu anh is showing that you, number one, are the leader and you're the governor of that land. And you should be aware of what's happening. The fact that they came all the way from Egypt to complain to me means they weren't comfortable complaining to you, which is a problem. Because you're supposed to be the one who's ruling them. and you're supposed to be just over them. You should know what's going on. Other reason is because you are the father of this person who has committed this crime and this form of oppression. And as a father, you should have more discipline over your children, especially because you are the leader of the Muslims. So he's giving an example, and he's trying to explain and show Amr ibn al-As and others that this is a sense of justice. It's not proper. It's not appropriate. If you're the leader, you have to be even more strict when it comes to your children, so that people don't think that you're going to take advantage. And this is why Umar radiallahu anh excluded Abdullah, his son, from being the leader after he passed away. He said, I don't want you involved. I don't want you to, try to claim any position. I don't want you to be involved in the committee, as we'll mention later. And so he said to him, I don't want you to be involved. And it's interesting, Ibn Umar radiallahu anh, after his father's death, he never ever sought for leadership. He always avoided, even during the conflict between the companions, he always avoided any kind of leadership or position of leadership, even though he was such a respected and loved companion who had lots of influence amongst the Muslims. So this is an example of the justice of Umar ibn Khattab. Umar radiallahu anh was even just with himself. There's a narration which mentions that there was a drought in the city of Medina, and he himself avoided food, because he said, until the people are being fed, I'm going to eat. I'll just eat whatever the people have. And once his stomach rumbled, and so he spoke to his stomach, and he said, rumble or don't rumble, you're not going to get any food until the people of Medina get their food. So his sense of justice, he didn't think to himself, well, I'm the leader, I need the food, otherwise, what's going to happen to everybody else, and I have to have some more food, I have to be in a higher, better position, in a better mental state, etc., etc. He had this level of justice even when it came to himself. And once he was sleeping in the Prophet's Masjid one day, the leader of the Muslims, just lying down, sleeping, no guards, no security, no bodyguards, no secretaries, nobody around him, just him by himself sleeping. A man saw him, and he said, "Hakamta fa'adilta fa'aminta fanimta." He said, you judged, and you were just, and you were fair, and the people were safe, and so you went to sleep. Meaning, you judged in such a good way that now you have the safety and security to be able to sleep, and you can relax. This is the result of your justice. This is a result of you being a wise judge. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, of course, he was the leader of the Muslims for approximately 10 years. And as we know, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh was assassinated by a slave who was a non-Muslim slave. And his name was Abu Lu'lu'ah. Abu Lu'lu'ah. And Abu Lu'lu'ah was a slave of Mughira ibn Shu'bah. Umar ibn Khattab had also made the decree that no non-Muslims will enter this land, the haram areas. And so he would make exceptions for people who had specific skills. One of those exceptions was Abu Lu'lu'ah, who was a carpenter. He was very skilled in carpentry. And he complained to Umar radiallahu anh about Mughira ibn Shu'bah. Something to do with money or payments or whatever the case may be. And Umar radiallahu anh, he told Abu Lu'lu'ah, fear Allah and be good to your master. And he left him. His intention was to also speak to Mughira, but he wanted to make sure that he carried on doing his duties. Abu Lu'lu'ah became angry and upset with Umar radiallahu anh. So he made a double-sided dagger. Okay, so it was a two-ended dagger. Both blades he dipped in poison. And then for Fajr Salah, when Umar radiallahu anh was leading the Salah, and of course there wasn't lighting like you have nowadays, it's dark, people are just getting ready for Salah. Fajr time also, you don't expect people to you don't expect anything to happen. You're just going to go pray and then carry on with your day, or maybe go to sleep, or whatever the case may be. And it's very interesting. Umar radiallahu anh, he would actually make dua to Allah for two things. He would make dua to Allah to make him a shaheed, and he would also make dua to Allah that he dies in Medina. And the people would say to him, his children would say to him, what kind of you're making these two du'as? If you're going to be a shaheed, you're going to be a shaheed if you're fighting, like in the army, on the outskirts of the Muslim empire, the Islamic State. That's where you're going to be a shaheed. Because That's where people are going to be shaheeds. That's how it is. But also you're saying you're going to die in Medina. How are you going to have both? And of course this is the answer to Umar radiallahu anhu's du'as. This man, as Umar radiallahu anhu is leading the salah and he's begun the salah, he rushes out from the side and slashes Umar radiallahu anhu on the side. And he also slashes some of the other companions. Eventually they reprimand him and he's caught. Umar radiallahu anhu, he's laying down, his stomach has been cut. So he slashed his stomach and he asks, who stabbed him? Who stabbed me? And they say it was Abu Lu'lu'ah. And he says, may Allah kill him, I was good towards him, I didn't do any wrong with him. And he says, Alhamdulillah, all praise be to Allah that he wasn't a Muslim who killed me. And look at the way he's thinking. He's not thinking, help me, and what's happened, and I'm dying, etc., etc., because he's not thinking about himself. He's thinking about others. And then he told people, make sure somebody finishes the salah, because he was killed during the salah. He says, make sure somebody else continues the salah. Make sure you pray your Fajr salah. So again, he's not even thinking about himself, even though he's in this specific state. And, he's saying, Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah, who did not make me die under the hands of somebody who is a Muslim. And so they tried to give him food, or they tried to give him water, and the water, when he drinks it, it comes out of his stomach. So they realize, this is basically the end. He's not going to survive this specific injury, this specific attack by Abu Lu'lu'ah. Of course, Abu Lu'lu'ah he's killed. He's executed for his crime. Umar radiallahu anh, he tells the companions, I am not going to leave the affair of the next leader to you guys to decide, because somebody before me did already done this. Somebody before me has already done this. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ never said anything about who should be the leader. So he's saying, I'm not going to leave the matter completely. But I'm not also going to appoint anyone, because somebody better than me has also done this also. Meaning Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. So what does he do? He does something else. He appoints a committee of the senior companions, and he says, all of you, a group of 10 or so, you are going to choose who is going to be the leader. So I'm not going to choose, I'm not going to leave it. I've chosen you guys, and then you guys need to decide who's going to be the leader. And of course, they chose Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu an to be the leader, and Umar radiallahu an, he passed away. Before he passed away, he requested from Aisha radiallahu anha that he could be buried next to his two companions, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu an. And Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, I was hoping to keep that space for myself, but seeing as though you've requested it, I'll let you be buried there. And when he passed away, he was buried beside his beloved companions. And this is the Khilafah of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an. And with that, we are concluding with the life of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu an. Any questions before we conclude? جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.